Hey everyone, this is Mr. Longacre. I hope you can hear me well and my voice is coming through clear. Today we're going to do a little bit of a different video where I'm going to go through the lecture today using our PowerPoint and also using a software called Screencast. It'll allow me to go through and record my screen while adding some narration for today. So you have to let me know if you like this better or if you prefer the whiteboard method where you can actually see me. So let's get started. Our topic for today is the Louisiana Purchase. Now, when we say Louisiana Purchase, we're talking about the Louisiana Territory, which you can see here in the darkest green. And the Louisiana Territory, up until about 1800, was not actually owned by the French. It was owned by the Spanish Empire, who had been there for a very, very long time. However, in the year 1800, the Spanish Empire decided to give, or essentially sell, this territory to the French because they were very scared of Napoleon. Napoleon, if I go back here, at this point in history was kind of making his mark by taking over all of Europe, and Spain kind of gave this to him as a peace agreement, essentially, and allowed him to take over all of this territory. Now, not a big deal maybe for France or Spain. However, it was a very big deal for the United States and Thomas Jefferson, because Jefferson in particular had his eye on the tiny little territory of New Orleans down here in the bayou. And New Orleans was a very important city because it controlled trade all the way through this Mississippi River. And if you controlled New Orleans, you essentially controlled that river. Well, as the states began to move out and move west, that became very important. And, under the Spanish Empire, Thomas Jefferson maybe felt like he could take that. But now that the French owned it, that was not an easy task to really go through. And so Jefferson started thinking about his options. How do I take the city of New Orleans, which is going to be very advantageous for our new country, with maybe avoiding war with France? And the only way that he could do that was Jefferson knew he was going to have to enlist help from the British. And you guys already know how Jefferson feels about the British and his relationship with them. He's not a big fan. And so he doesn't want to do that. That's kind of his last resort. However, he decides to send his young protege, James Monroe. He's pictured here on the left-hand side. And Robert Livingston, who was the American minister, the American ambassador. And these two guys were instructed, pay attention to these details, to go over to France and offer to buy the city of New Orleans and all the land east to it for $10 million. So again, he was instructed to buy the territory of New Orleans and all this little stuff down in here for $10 million. And that was his plan. Now, if the plan didn't work, they were then supposed to go right over to Great Britain and negotiate terms where they could work together and fight the French and take New Orleans for themselves. So that's the plan. And off James Monroe goes, and he goes to Great Britain. He goes to France, and he sits down with Napoleon. And Napoleon says, all right, guys, here's the deal. I don't want to just sell you New Orleans. He says, in fact, what I'll do is if you give me $15 million, I'll not only sell you New Orleans, but I'll sell you all of this territory here, 30 million acres, just if you add $5 million more. And I can imagine for Monroe and for Livingston here, they were kind of dumbfounded almost that they would go over and Napoleon would agree to sell this massive territory here for $15 million. And as you can imagine, if you sit down and say, would you sell this for $15 million? Yeah, probably. And so they come back to Jefferson and they said, hey, Jefferson, you know how you told us just to buy New Orleans down here? Turns out we brokered an agreement to buy all of this territory here. And they're going to come back to Jefferson feeling pretty good about themselves. But we got to go back. Why would Napoleon agree to sell all of this territory? Well, he does it for a couple reasons, guys. He is currently fighting a war against Britain in Europe, and he needs the revenue in order to finance that war. And so he decides, yeah, I'll sell territory halfway across the world, and I'll fund my army with that. Secondly, by selling the Louisiana Purchase to the Americans, he would be able to avoid the Americans getting involved with the British and forming an alliance that maybe he didn't really want them to have in the first place. And so Monroe and Livingston come back to America feeling good about themselves, and they come up to Thomas Jefferson, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got an agreement for 30 million acres, and it's only going to cost us $15 million. I mean, just think about how cheap that land really is. And they present it to Jefferson, and Jefferson says, wow, this is great, guys. Good job. Way to go. But there's just one problem. I don't have the power in the Constitution to purchase new territories. And, you know, this is a serious problem for Jefferson, because we know he's a strict interpreter. He views the Constitution black and white. If it says he can, he can. If it says he can't, he can't. So what does he do? Well, I can just imagine who is sitting in the back of the room, maybe, laughing about Jefferson's current predicament. Who do you think is laughing as Jefferson struggles to see whether or not he can expand presidential power? You got it yet? You got it? Who do you think it is? If you're saying Alexander Hamilton, you would be correct, right? Because this is Hamilton's whole entire point, saying that, look, sometimes there are situations where we have to expand the power of the government far beyond what we had ever wanted. And Thomas Jefferson, kind of maybe a little bit hypocritical here, says, you know what? We are going to do this. And he signs the bill and expands the size of the country to more than double its original size. And so this man here, this lover of small government, has now just expanded the size of our country with just a stroke of the pen. You know, you're saying the pen is mightier than the sword. Maybe it applies here in this case. But Jefferson has now completely gone back on everything he had really stood for up until that point when it came to the Constitution, and drastically expanded not only the power of the federal government to purchase new territory, but the size of the country itself. And so with one signature, what has he done? Well, look here. He has now mastered the Mississippi River. He's now claimed that for the United States. Okay, so here's your first one. He's also doubled the size of your country. Very important. I mean, you think about all the advantages that comes with more territory. And he avoided a war with France. And so, I mean, Jefferson has done quite well for himself, but it's kind of come at the cost of his morals. And so I'm trying to highlight this here. Sorry, this looks terrible. And, you know, you can decide, you know, should Jefferson have done that or not? And whether or not you agree, what we do know is that now that we have all this territory, the only question left is what do we do with it? And that is where Jefferson is going to hire two men, Lewis and Clark, to go and explore this territory. Now, I'm assuming a lot of you know a little bit about Lewis and Clark, or that you've at least heard of them before. Kind of like the American Marco Polo, if you will. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is in your next video or in your next assignment, you're going to explore Lewis and Clark a little bit before you come to class. And then in class next period, we're going to watch an IMAX video produced about these two journeys. So make sure you fill out the rest of your notes on Lewis and Clark. I think that'll take you all the way through Notes B, and you read over what their journey was like and what they did. And then when you come into class, we're going to really watch this really riveting movie that was produced into IMAX theaters that I think you'll really enjoy. So I hope that helps. A little bit about the Louisiana Purchase and how we got that from Napoleon. And that's all.